as a football fan to go week in, week out as a Magdeburg season ticket holder and not see them win, but you can't yell at them because they're top of the league.
Ollie, I don't want this to turn into the Ange Postecoglou podcast, but I feel like we're talking about him every week. People get angry at stuff that's kind of true in some ways.
It hurts
like,
if it's true. Yeah,
like he's the GOAT, don't get me wrong, he's the GOAT. He's the best tennis player of all time, but it's still going to sting if someone points out the fact that, hey, like the years are slipping by now and, you know... Hello, welcome along to episode number 31 of Not Another Sports Pod with myself, David, and Mr. Oliver Wilson. Ollie, lots to get through this week. I want to actually look ahead to the final round of the European Super League, aka the Champions League. I want to recap the Australian Open. I want to talk NFL. We've got any other business requests from listeners, and I want to talk Premier League title race, of course, as well. But just before we recap our own weekends, which have certainly been varied with Ollie Wilson nearly being arrested due to anti-terrorism charges or something similar, which we'll get into. I just want to say, Ollie, there's nothing like turning on BBC, clicking onto BBC Sport first thing in the morning and seeing Taylor Swift's smiling face at you, and you know something's happened in the NFL when instead of Ruben Amorim or Ange Postecoglou or, you know, Yannick Sinner winning the Aussie Open, I've got Taylor Swift smiling at me. So I think I know what the coverage is going to be for the next 3 weeks or 2 weeks, whatever it is.
I mean, isn't it weird that is the way that you know that the NFL's about now, is seeing a pop icon who's dating a player? It hurts a little bit, to be honest, as a sports fan that likes to not necessarily mix the world of, you know, pop and celebrity with. I like the games, right? I mean, that's what I'm about. I'm about the sport, not the hoopla around it. But no, let's have Taylor Swift. But that'll lead us into a discussion later on today about how is it good for NFL marketing that Taylor Swift's boyfriend makes it to a Super Bowl and all that kind of thing. So we'll talk about that later. If it was
the other way around, what would be the equivalent? Like, I don't know, Ed Sheeran like dating Serena Williams or something, and if every time you cut to Ed Sheeran, would people be like, no, it's about the tennis star, it's about the tennis star.
It would be putting Serena Williams on his posters advertising that he's got a gig coming up. That would be what it would be.
Oh, I can actually tell you a good equivalent, mate. So I cover some figure skating. I don't think I talked about this on pod last week, but I cover some figure skating as we've discussed. Don't think we chatted about this. And Jake Paul is dating one of the Canadian, I think, figure skaters. And he was at an event in Europe this week. And the camera kind of went to him once or twice. And I understand why they didn't want to focus on him, because you don't want to take anything away from the female athlete, right? But at the same time, it's like, who more famous than Jake Paul is ever attending a figure skating event? The answer is basically no one, right? So here's your opportunity to absolutely hammer your social media with Jake Paul's face, just to reel people in. And I don't think you're doing a disrespect to female sports stars by doing that. But it's certainly an interesting balance.
Yeah, I think it's just the idea of, as I say, Taylor ends up being like quite often pretty front and center on the cameras and stuff. Like, she's one of the biggest personalities on the planet.
Name.
Yeah.
Household name.
Like, takes more private jet flights than anybody, including one that was like 15 minutes or something like that, which is insane. But yeah, I mean,
have you seen the graphic, by the way, of her plane like zipping around the world? Yeah. I mean, it's unbelievable.
Have you seen the guy that does like Taylor Swift's private jet flights on a flight simulator on his computer, just to show how short some of them are? And like it's just Anyway, let's see, but this is what it does. We're a sports podcast and we're already getting sucked into the Taylor Swift narrative, whether you're anti-Swiftie or
Taylor Swift songs. Or would you recognise them if you heard them?
Oh, I'd recognise loads of them if I heard them. Yeah. Bad Blood, We Are Never Getting Back Together, 22. I mean, there's loads of them. There's quite a few on my gym playlist. I liked. I've done journeys across Canada on their Highway 1 that literally goes from one side to the other for like 14 hours with a lot of Taylor Swift thrown in on the playlist on that. So
I was hoping that NFL and Taylor Swift would sink it at the end of Not Another Sports Pod 31, but seems to have, as is the case, seems to have made its way to the front. We will talk NFL, Ollie. And also, I want to talk about how three-peat is one of the greatest phrases in sport, I reckon. Because I saw that on the BBC Sport. You mentioned it last week, didn't you? Three-peat. And I was like, because you don't get to use that very often. Obviously, it's American. Don't we hear that in UK sports media, do we? Like if City were going for 3 straight titles, would we call it a three-peat? Maybe, but not really.
Yeah, there's a three-peat's really good in terms of it's also a sign of greatness, because if you do something twice in a row, there could still be an element of like good fortune. If you do it 3 times in a row, so it does stand out. I've always liked winningest. A guy is the winningest coach in Philadelphia Eagles history and stuff like that. Yeah.
That came up on a graphic in some Libertadores stuff. Ollie and I were covering it, and I was just like, mate, that's not a word. Yeah. And Ollie was the American voice.
Yeah, that's the winningest, most team winningest in the Libertadores.
Mate, that is so bad. What happened to our beautiful English language?
Bounce back ability, it's pretty strong.
Classic, great one. In fact, even got a request recently to use that in on a pod or in comms, because it is great. Let's talk about our weekends, Ollie. As is the very world of sports journalism. I'm in Barcelona, but much more interestingly, Ollie Wilson, tell us what happened. You weren't allowed into a ground, or what happened, Ollie?
I was labelled a security threat at one of the big rivalry games of the weekend. I was meant to be doing MK Dons against AFC Wimbledon.
On site, obviously.
On site at Stadium MK. And it's important to know that Stadium MK is a football stadium that has a big hotel built into it, right? So the hotel run the large aspect of the internals. So none of this is on MK Dons Football Club, who were exceptionally good at helping to sort out this situation. But go there, and there used to be a key fob situation where to get to the gantry, you have to get a fob from the hotel reception that is for all the doors to get up to the gantry, because the way to get to the gantry is to go through hotel room corridors, and they have fob access from the lifts to get onto the corridor where the rooms are and stuff. Obviously, because you've got football fans running around and all that kind of stuff. I get that. But they've got rid of this process, and we were marched by security up to the gantry, me and the cameraman, and they were like, look, we'll keep all these doors open, etc. This will be fine. Don't worry about it. All day long, you'll be able to go to and from. So I get ready, sorted, doing comms, get all this new kit set up, and we have a complete kit failure about 20 minutes before going on air. And I'm devastated because I've got all my notes ready. Social media post is out. Looking forward to this on Sky Sports.
And by the way,
Plus.
when you're a commentator, that pre-setup, possibly true of any job, Ollie, which I do get. Maybe you're giving a presentation at work or something like that. But certainly as a commentator, because the time you start working is so precise that you really do need to, everything prior to that moment needs to be pretty calm, doesn't it? Of course, like live sport, things happen, but essentially the hour before, ideally, everything needs to be very, very calm.
Yeah, because you're getting your team news, you're writing your intros, maybe, stuff like that. So you want that to then not feel too rushed about those intros, etc. Make sure they're all correct. Make sure they read nice. Excuse me. And then go into the game, get going. So yeah, we have a kit failure 20 minutes before we go on air. I don't go on air. Complete balls up. So they asked me to stick around on the gantry and do some kit testing while somebody else is now doing the commentary back at studio. So I'm stood there waiting, and they say, look, it's going to be about 20 minutes, 25 minutes. We're 10 minutes into the game, and I'm like, you know what? If I'm going to be stood here, I'm going to go down to the press area and get my press pass and get a coffee and all this kind of thing. Because I haven't had a chance to get my press pass yet because we were frog marched up to the gantry by security. So I go down out of the ground and go to get my press pass at the reception. Oh, no, we haven't got one for you here. No, not at all. So I go round to the media entrance. No, we haven't got one there either. And then we get like the high vis. Got a guy here trying to get in. He claims he's part of the media. I'm like, I've been on the gantry.
They didn't recognise you, Mr. Wilson.
Not a chance. No, not NASP listeners, unfortunately.
No, I was going to say, give it. Not yet.
Well, no, they might be listeners, but not YouTube. I think that's the trouble. We need to drive the traffic to the YouTube, see the face. But yeah. So then there's a lot of this, Mr. Whatever, this guy's claiming, etc. And I'm stood around waiting for ages. And now we're at the point where I'm like, well, I could do with being back up there. All I want is a coffee. I just need to be able to there so we can go and do these tests and I can maybe leave or get done or whatever. So I'm like, look, forget it. I'm going to go back to the gantry. And they're like, well, you can't go back to the gantry. I was like, well, I've just been at the So I go round to the hotel reception, go up to the 4th floor. All these doors that they said they were going to keep open for us for gantry access are now electronically shut. So I go, there's a very nice maid who's doing the room turn down service, lets me into the correct corridor, but then the access to the gantry is through a maid's storeroom, and she won't let me in there. She's like, no, it's for private, you can't go in. I'm like, but Okay, fine. And then a security guy comes up. I've got him on level 4. I've got him on level 4. Like, are you fucking kidding me? Like, mate, I'm going to have to march you down to reception. We're going to have to sort this out. There's nothing to sort out. Like, I should be there. You guys haven't provided a pass for me now. Like, I've been there all day. I'm showing them emails of all the letters from the production company, the football club. Like, I should be there. Yeah, he's got emails.
What happened in the end, mate?
Oh, it's just... I get frog marched down to reception. I have to sit there for 35 minutes. And then a guy from MK Don's press staff comes up and he's like apologetic on the knees, like embarrassed, which was, they were very good about it. And eventually I got up to the gantry for the second half of the game. But like, if my cameramen had stepped off the gantry, because there's no toilet access without going out of the corridors, if any of the camera crew, or if at half time I'd gone to take a wee or something like that when I was doing the broadcast, I wouldn't have been able to get back onto the gantry again. I mean, it's just ludicrous, like high-vis nonsense. And
for those just listening on Spotify or wherever, Ollie Wilson's got his head in his hands right now. So even reliving this memory is a traumatic moment for Mr. Wilson. Ollie, if you don't mind, we'll dive into the pod. Not that I don't enjoy Ollie Wilson's. I can feel it, man. I can feel the stress and the tension. There's nothing worse than getting like a curveball like minutes before a broadcast, or awful, man. I still remember the times where I've been like stuck on a train or in traffic and I've been like racing to get to a game. Like probably happened a couple of times in my career.
Am I like the one AFC Wimbledon fan that is for some reason trying to break on the gantry and take down the world's media? Like, I mean, what is what is going on? Yeah,
game's gone. Right, start Premier League. Ollie, I don't want this to turn into the Ange Postecoglou podcast, but I feel like we're talking about him every week. He's gonna be sacked. It's just when he is gonna be sacked. I don't see how he survives this, Ollie. I mean, I texted you yesterday and said, Tottenham, relegation battle? And you said no, and I agree with you because there's 3 poor sides in this division. But I tell you what, I was looking at his last 10 results compared to the last 10 results of the previous 6 Tottenham managers that have got sacked, and it's worse than any of them, right? So, I mean, he's right down there. The cup games can save him, maybe. As I say, we talked about it a lot last week, so I don't want to go over old ground, Ollie, but give me a number of games that you think he's got from here. Do you think he'll make it to the end of the season, is my question.
I was actually thinking about this in terms of if you sack him now and, like, say before a semi-final of a Carabao Cup, for instance, or before a final if they get there or something like that, you look foolish as Tottenham for holding on this long to something that's clearly a problem and Ange Postecoglou wasn't willing to change. I think we've got to the point now where the club looks silly if they change Postecoglou out. As opposed to, it's a smart decision. Just before December, a guy comes in, he gets a month with the transfer window and all that kind of stuff. Because anybody that takes that job now is hands handcuffed behind the back. That's the squad you're dealing with. This is now the minimal amount of time that you've got to implement a new change in system, get these players working and playing a style of football that's not going to concede at least 2 goals every other game. And I wonder if Ange will see out at least the rest of this season. I do think we're at the point where you just go, you're not going to be a relegation candidate despite the loss to Leicester this weekend. So you just ride it out, but over the next 3-4 months, you just assess. Is this guy going to turn it round to actually produce the goods we want? Probably not. Well, now we've got 4 months to find the perfect guy.
14 senior players injured. 14. It's close, apparently, to the worst Premier League injury crisis ever in terms of statistics of players out. I mean, 14 senior players injured is insane. Apparently, a few back over the next couple of weeks, they need to be, because this is a free-fall Tottenham side. All right, we'll leave it there with Tottenham, Ollie, because we did cover it last week. But I just think they've got a home game in the Europa League against Elfsborg, I think, which I think they'll win. But then they're away at Brentford in the Premier League. They're away at Anfield, Carabao Cup semi-final, second leg. They're away at Villa Park, big FA Cup game. I mean, it's really tough to see them getting something there. I think you lose those 3 games, away Brentford, away Liverpool, away Villa, and I think you're in big, big trouble. But we'll see. I hope I'm wrong, as I've said many times. I like the Ange show. It's a lot of fun. Elsewhere in the Premier League, I mean, lots was going on. One thing that did just catch my eyes, Ruben Amorim, every weekend seems to come up with a different quote. And I think the press are going to end up loving Amorim because he's a very quotable manager. And he said today, he'd rather play his 63-year-old goalkeeping coach than a player who didn't try in training, very thinly veiled, talking about Marcus Rashford. Now, Marcus Rashford said he wants to leave. You're not playing Marcus Rashford. You don't like Marcus Rashford. He's obviously leaving the football club and he's not part of the plans. Why put the knife in, man? Like, why say Man United, this is the worst Man United team in the history of the football club last week when it's clearly not? You know, there was a team in the 1930s that lost 12 in the spin and got relegated or something like that. Like, why say you'd rather play your 63-year-old goalkeeping coach instead of Marcus Rashford? Obviously, you wouldn't because he's 63 years old. Like, why say these ridiculous things that are great quotes and the media will love him for it, and it shows a lovely use of the English language, which, he's, I would say, very close to... You know when someone says they're fluent in English? Like Ruben Amorim is very, very close to being genuinely, like, absolutely fluent in English. So I can see all these things, but why give the media this kind of stuff? Like, what's in it for him? Everything about Ruben Amorim to Manchester United so far to me has been extremely confusing, and his quotes after every game match that.
Is there not a problem with managers kind of holding players to account? Like, if you don't try, you will get called out for it. I'm not going to be this guy that sweeps stuff under the carpet and says, oh no, it's all good, it's all fine at the club, you know, Marcus is a great lad, we're just trying to find a way to work him in. No, there's open honesty. And I definitely think that's something that, I don't know this, but you can do that at a club, particularly like Sporting Lisbon or something like that, I think more than a Manchester United. It's not quite the same global brand. I don't think the players are necessarily mollycoddled in the exact same way that Manchester United players would be, etc. But I think
they don't have as much power as well.
Yeah,
players. Presumably at Sporting Lisbon. You know, if you want to get rid of a player at Sporting Lisbon, you can.
So I think there is very much this. There could be this very much idea of like Ruben Amorim takes no prisoners when it comes to his players, and I'm not against that at all. I think that's an excellent attitude to have as a manager.
Is it self-preservation as well, Ollie? Like, if you set the frame at the start of your Manchester United career that this is the worst Manchester United team in history, that Marcus Rashford's a joke and doesn't train and this kind of thing, is it not just you're setting a stall out to say, hey, none of this is my fault. Like, I walked into this mess. What, you expect me to fix it in half a season? No chance. Like, he's trying to give himself the longest period of time possible to have a free hit.
I think it's motivation more than anything else, to be honest. I wouldn't necessarily say it's self-preservation, because I don't think Ruben Amorim needs to be in a mode of self-preservation right now, because he's only been in the job for 5 minutes. I think if this was like 2 years down the line and this started happening, then maybe. But I think this is more a case of, like, it was very prevalent in late 90s, early 2000s to have the more kind of, and obviously further back probably than that as well, but have that more hard-ass manager in multiple sports. And you'd hear about like players sorting out problems with each other, like players in the dressing room sorting each other out kind of thing. And I think Ruben Amorim is just maybe trying to instill something like that, of rather than having this prima donna group of players at Manchester United that care about the paycheck but not necessarily about the club, etc. Like, right, well, if you want to be the guy that walks out on freaking Paris Fashion Week in midweek between games or something, that's cool. But if you don't perform and if you don't put the effort in, I'm letting people know that you're not putting the effort in, because I don't want people that are here that aren't going to work to their maximum to achieve the goals. And that's what any manager should do. And various managers have very different ways of doing it. I don't think it's a style of motivation that you can employ at a Premier League level with a side like Manchester United in this era of football. I may be wrong. And I may be completely talking out of my own arse at this point, to be honest, Dave, because I don't know the ins and outs of Ruben Amorim or Manchester United that well. But I don't mind accountability, particularly to the media, because the media is meant to.
It's hard to say what was said to him. Maybe he was told, you can do whatever you want with the squad, because we've recognised that this squad has ultimately, even though they picked up a few trophies, this squad has ultimately failed in terms of getting Manchester United back to anywhere like where they were under Alex Ferguson. So, you know, maybe he's been told by the hierarchy, look, you do whatever you want. There's no player in this squad that we aren't open to selling, and therefore this is your squad, at least for, you know, the half of the season that you've got now, and we'll chat again in the summer. So he must have, well, not must have, but I presume he's been given some kind of green light to throw players under the bus, because that's exactly what he's done. The Marcus Rashford one is really odd, because the thing is, and Jamie Carragher's made this point a few times on Sky Sports, we've never spoken so much about a player who's not actually that good. You know, he had one incredible season when he scored 19 goals or 20-something goals or whatever it was, and there's so much airtime about Marcus Rashford, and he's actually just not that good. And if apparently he's on 350 grand a week, even if he's on a bit less, I don't know who's taking Marcus Rashford. You see him linked to Milan and Barcelona, and it's really hard to see that unless Manchester United are going to pay 80% of his wages. And, a Milan's just going to take a chance and say, I wonder what we could get. Wonder if in 6 months he could score a few goals for us or something. So, don't know where he goes. Don't really know where Manchester United go. But, maybe Ruben Amorim does.
The fall of Marcus Rashford is just so tragic more than anything else. Because you want players like that to come through your youth setup and be those people that you look at in a derby game where Man United v Man City means something to them. There's actually a lot of pride and heart goes into it. And when you've got a club that's been mismanaged by both hierarchy and managers more than anything else, and you just become despondent with it because you're Marcus Rashford, you're going into the England setup and you're hearing talk of stability from your England teammates like at Arsenal and places like that, and then you go back to Manchester United and you're either being thrown under the bus by one manager or given over amounts of praise by another manager, and you don't really know where you stand week to week in terms of your playing time more than anything else. I don't think Rashford was ever exceptional and like the great United hope, but it's more like you look at sport in general right now and you want to see more players that have the guts and desire, because that will get you as far as anything else will over pure talent. If you've got the heart to keep grinding more than anything else, and when a player like Marcus Rashford, who should be one of those guys coming up through the club, should have that heart to grind out all the time, like it's just sad more than anything else. It just continues the kind of football is mercenaries rather than anything else.
Elsewhere in the Premier League, Ollie, just briefly on the title race. I actually still think Arsenal could win the league. I don't think they will, but I do think they can win the league. I think that was a big result against Wolves. 20 minutes to go. I think if they drop points in that one, I think it then becomes extremely difficult. The problem they've got is they're just running out of games almost because they've got 15 games left. Liverpool very, very comfortable at home against Ipswich. So it's one of those where that gap mentioned last week just always seems to be 6 points with a game in hand, 7 points with a game in hand, 5 points with a game in hand. It's just not budging, and Arsenal do need to make it budge quickly. But I think if they can stay within 6 points, maybe Liverpool don't win the Merseyside derby, which is the game in hand. Maybe they draw it. I think they can keep it within 7 points and then go to Anfield. Even if the gap was still 7 points, they go to Anfield. I think they stay alive in it. So I do think they are still in the Premier League title race, but it's another kind of weekend that comes and goes without them shortening the gap.
You think the Forest bubbles burst as well? I mean, 5-0 against Bournemouth, who 9 goals in 2 games, but that is a game and a result that wouldn't have happened in that Leicester City run. And if we're comparing apples to apples in terms of struggling sides suddenly finding themselves in a title race, I'm sorry to say it, Forest fans, but that's the sign that you weren't and aren't in this title push at all.
And how about Ollie, Bournemouth only being 4 points behind Forest? I mean, half a chance that Bournemouth finish above Forest in the Premier League this season. We've obviously spent the first half of the season rightly people hailing Nottingham Forest like incredible where they are on the table, and they could still finish 3rd or 4th or even 5th. Will probably get you a Champions League spot. I was reading this morning, but let's just nod a hat to Bournemouth and what's being done there, because they've got all the momentum. They actually host Liverpool next in the Premier League next weekend, which should be a cracker.
Well, I think I was the one who, when we were having a very early discussion about managers, it was Iraola who I said, well, look what he's doing with Bournemouth at the moment. A fantastic job at the start of this season. It just continues, Dave. It just continues. And I think there's more of a chance than the way you kind of phrased it of Bournemouth finishing above Forest, because Forest are kind of in that unknown. We're still... I don't think anybody's convinced that Forest can maintain this run of form that they've still been on as a top 3 candidate for the remainder of the season, because we're also surprised that they're even in this position in the first place. But if they are in this position, they can also fall from it, and other teams like Bournemouth can push themselves into those positions. It'd be fascinating if Bournemouth were pushing for a top 4 spot come the end of this season. There's a lot of things need to happen, and there's a level of consistency that needs to be shown. But it's not out the realms of possibility considering what we've seen in this battle all around the Premier League so far.
And also, Ollie, the fact that it looks like at the rate we're going, and I know a lot of people said this last season as well, but it does look like 5th place is going to get you a Champions League spot, which we can argue the merits of that, because I actually think it probably shouldn't, because 5th isn't, you're not nearly the best in your league, but you could have a Bournemouth or a Nottingham Forest in the Champions League next season. It'd be great fun. It really would, especially in this new format, which I want to talk about next, because we've got the final round of fixtures midweek. But it'd be great fun, wouldn't it? Bournemouth having 8 games in the Champions League. And because of the format now, you've got a real chance. If you finish 5th in the Premier League, you scrape in, you've actually got a real chance of being in the Champions League the next February, because in those 8 games, you basically only need 10 or 11 points from the 8 games. And Bournemouth at home, like, not many European sides will fancy going there, I don't think, midweek.
No, and that's one of the stories where finishing 5th kind of takes the gloss off. So, not to be Victor Meldrew again, I'm finding the negative spin on all of it, but like, Bournemouth made the Champions League a few years ago when it was like top 2 going into the Champions League, for instance. Like, that's a great story. Top 5 going into the Champions League. It's great that 5th place in the Premier League is outrageous for a side like Bournemouth. It would be an unbelievable achievement. But I would still look at it and be like, but would they ever really get there if we hadn't kind of manufactured this way for Premier Leagues and La Liga and Serie A to have so many options going into a Champions League? I mean, yeah. But, yeah, take nothing away from Iraola if he did it. It's a big if. There's a long way to go. But they've got goal-scoring form, that's for sure. I mean, we were lauding Spurs a few weeks back for the fact that at least they score goals, and so many wasted chances this week. But Bournemouth right now are about the hottest thing in the Premier League in terms of finding the back of the net.
Final round of this Champions League group stage European Super League extravaganza. Ollie, before I talk about the final match day of this Champions League, let me just go through what I think would characterise a European Super League, right? These things, for me, would characterise a European Super League. Firstly, the biggest sides in Europe being almost guaranteed to stay in the competition. Secondly, the league to last about half the year. So in this sense, from August to late January. So pretty much 6 months of the season. I would also expect in a European Super League, I would expect the big sides to consistently face the biggest sides. And that has happened in this league format of the Champions League. I would also expect big prize money for the winner of a European Super League. Now, it's currently 2 million, I believe, if you top the Champions League or European Super League group. But I imagine that's going to go up in future years. I can envisage a day, Ollie, where it's like 10 million to actually top the Champions League format. So they kind of by the back door, but not even really by the back door, created this European Super League. And finally, I would say that there would be an awful lot of games with almost no chance of relegation for the biggest side. So those are the things that I would think would make up a European Super League, and they, coincidentally, are pretty much box ticked by what we've seen in the Champions League format this season. I just want to say, I don't actually mind it. Like, I was never one of the ones protesting on the street against the moral vacuum of the European Super League. I actually thought, well, it's kind of interesting. Like, it's something different. Like, UEFA don't have that. They're a private company. They don't have a God-given right to monopolize all these big European clubs. And if another company came along and created a European Super League, like, that's in many ways, it's healthy competition, It's I was just about to give the worst analogy ever, but like, Eurostar have dominated that London to Paris route forever, and like, Branson finally is coming in and is going to cause some competition. And people think, oh, London to Paris, Eurostar, yeah, it has to be Eurostar, right? But why does it? It's a private company. So I actually don't think the European Super League was a bad concept. And we've ended up there anyway, so it kind of doesn't matter. But I just think it's a little bit disingenuous how it's happened. But we're in the final round of fixtures in this league format. I've actually enjoyed it. I think it's quite interesting. I think the group stages always get a bit of criticism because they're maybe not that exciting, and all the big clubs are going to qualify anyway. So it's added something different. It's new. I would say finally 2 things. I mean, we played. I think you end up playing 144 group stage matches to relegate 12 sides, and the 12 sides that will be relegated are the likes of, I mean, Ollie, young boys. Nothing against them. They've taken their chance. They're in the Champions League. Or Slovan Bratislava. They got 0 points. They got goal differences of -20 and -18. I mean, they've lost 7 from 7. I'm not quite sure what they could have gained from this experience. Sturm Graz, Girona, Leipzig, Sparta Prague. I mean, these sides have been basically battered by everyone. So we played an awful lot of football matches to relegate a group of teams that were never going to win the Champions League. But the only thing you can say is that the Manchester City situation, I guess, keeps match day 8 alive, because City probably have to win, don't they, against Club Brugge or Club Brugge to stay in the competition. So what do you think? I mean, yeah, what do you think about that Windsor Ramble?
Well, the soapbox, I can finally pull it out from underneath your feet there, man. That was a very good diatribe into the thoughts on the European Super League that is the Champions League. I think looking at it the other way as well, not necessarily the clubs that we've lost, but the clubs going through. And let's say, for instance, that Club Brugge don't get past Manchester City, which is really one of the only interesting moments of Jeopardy going into this. Which teams would you look at and say, "Ooh, that's a Cinderella story for them"? Because I think, aside from Brest, who literally, I think for me, have had their whole participation in this tournament ruined by the highlight clips of pundits making stupid jokes about the club name.
Agree 100%. It's not remotely funny.
Yeah. And it disappointed me slightly when they've lent into it a bit and sent some shirts to pundits that have been making these jokes and all that kind of stuff. But aside from them being there, Celtic were always one of those, could finish second if they get the right group, but probably a third place side in going into the Europa League. But Celtic are up there. The rest of the sides, apart from Brest, are sides that I would expect to have a good chance of going through a UEFA Champions League group stage, as it was anyway. So I don't actually think that this has done much in terms of boiling down to an exciting match day 8, nor has it given clubs a chance to kind of reshuffle the order of European football slightly. All it's done is it's given us more match weeks with more games between the big sides early on in this competition. But more isn't better, as we keep saying. The stakes are what makes a game. So you can have Milan playing PSG 6 times in a row, but if the 7th time actually there's something relying on it, that's more interesting than all of those 6 times previously put together. And that's what this feels like to me. It just feels like a lot of games that don't really mean that much. I mean, the likelihood is you're going to need 10 points from 8 games, so you can draw 7 and win 1.
Absolutely nothing, that. 10 points from 8 games is absolutely nothing. It's relegation form in the Premier League almost. Like, it's, if you had 10 points in your first 8 Premier League games, you'd be right down there. So, yeah, I think to add to your point there, Ollie, I mean, Liverpool hosted Real Madrid at Anfield, something that should be, like one of the apex matches of Champions League football, and Real Madrid lost, but it doesn't really matter because they're still going to be in the competition in February. Okay, fine, they've got to go through the playoff round, but it's not going to scare Real Madrid, is it? So It kind of doesn't matter. I also think that topping the group, which Arne Slot, the Liverpool boss, seems to be obsessed with because he's played essentially his best side the whole competition pretty much. I don't really see what massive benefit you get from that, whereas a Manchester City could get through with 11 points, having been terrible in the Champions League group stage, and still go on and win it. I mean, that's not impossible to me. Real Madrid been very patchy, can still go on and win it. So I'm not sure really. I mentioned the prize money. I think it's £2 million for the side that tops the group, but yeah, I'm not sure there's a massive benefit. I think the only criteria is, are you still in the Champions League by February? When it kicks off in August, what do we want from this? We want to still be in the Champions League by February. If we have to play a playoff round, we have to play a playoff round. Because you've got a very good chance that Liverpool will top the group and end up playing a Real Madrid, a Man City, something like that. So then you'd think, right, okay, what exactly was the point in that? Pretty confusing. But listen, I don't blame UEFA for trying something new. They obviously sensed that because of the Super League idea, they sensed that there was something there. It wasn't like a terrible idea that was pulled out of nowhere. It had been bubbling, that there are reasons why some kind of Super League alternative should take place. And actually, have they just been really clever, UEFA? Like, they've been like, right, we've got the Champions League. We know the knockout stages are great and work and everyone watches and they're fantastic. But we need to do something about these 6 months. And, hey, why aren't we playing any games in January? That's a disgrace. Let's fill up those midweeks ASAP. And they just thought, okay, we could just change it around, create this lovely little league format. And all they need to do now, really, is give the winner 10 million euros. And then you will get clubs desperately trying to win that, because 10 million quid, even to the biggest clubs in the world, is not nothing. So I think you could do something like that, and you kind of create your European Super League, and then you also have whoever wins the Champions League. I think
the only worry is have you shown all these clubs that a European Super League can garner so much interest? Because I know there are a lot of people that have been sceptical about this league phase and have really enjoyed it actually, and enjoyed seeing, Villa against Dortmund, isn't that fantastic, etc. Might it turn into we kind of want to see a lot more of that, and suddenly Villa Tottenham on a Tuesday night in the Premier League is good, but it's not necessarily filling my boots, so to speak, when we could be on a trip down to the south coast of France and down to the Principality of Monaco to go and see Villa on the road against Monaco in a few weeks' time. And it just opens the door slightly that this is a good idea, and bigger and better things can come from this idea, as opposed to this is a good idea, shall we just leave it here? Which I don't think any executive has ever said in modern day sport at this point. This is good. Have we got enough of it?
And rightfully so, because that's not their job, right? No CEOs said, right, we're making a good amount of money here, folks. How about we just, try and distribute the cash a little more evenly the next few years, just maintain the status quo, just keep it calm. We could screw over these people or add this or that, or push the workload on our employees. No, let's just keep it as is. Doesn't happen.
We don't need another 25 million in TV rights. Said no one ever at UEFA or FIFA or anywhere else. And as you say, that's kind of the way it should be. That's the beast that's been created. But yeah, I mean, good on Brest, and I hope Brugge do it this week. I really do. I think to keep me interested and to make me think that there's a point in this league phase, I hope they will. Yeah, it's unlikely. And City will probably, as you say, end up winning the Champions League.
I think Pep Guardiola might have a good second half to the season, and I think that, good result against Chelsea in the Premier League. I think if they beat Brugge, then I think they travel to the Emirates next, and there could be a good 10 days for Pep Guardiola, but we'll see. Australian Open, before we talk about...
Whoa.
Yeah, go.
So, insane football stat that I noticed going into this weekend. We're going to drop down to the German second tier, Windsor. Mm-hmm. Magdeburg, have you seen this? Have you heard about this?
No.
Before this weekend, top of the second tier of German football, hadn't won at home this season, but were the league leaders.
Say that again, Ollie.
Top of the second tier in German football. Second tier
of German football, yeah?
Yep, second tier. Magdeburg, going into this weekend, were top of the league and hadn't won a home game this season in the league.
That's fucking bonkers.
That is mad, isn't it? They drew this weekend, so they've still not won at home. They're not top of the league, obviously, anymore. But 1-0, drawn 7, lost 2, scored 9, conceded 14, and then away have won 8, drawn 1, lost 1.
That's a great stat, man.
How frustrating must that be as a football fan to go week in, week out as a Magdeburg season ticket holder and not see them win? But you can't yell at them because they're top of the league.
You can't call them crap either to the person sat next to you because you'd be top of the league. That's a mad stat. I sent Ollie an Australian Open stat this week, which he didn't think it was that impressive, which we'll get onto. But yeah, that's a great one, man. Really good.
And the other one was just the Tottenham former managers. Where are they now? Antonio Conte's sits top of Serie A. Jose Mourinho second in the Turkish Superliga, and Nuno Espirito Santo third place in the Premier League. That's their last 3 managers.
Ooh.
If that doesn't scream a mismanaged club away from the managers.
So the problem's not their coaches, it's...
Every Tottenham supporter I hear says it's Daniel Levy.
Yeah,
is the issue. And it's hard to argue against it now.
Hard for Daniel Levy, though. He's created this, this incredible stadium. They're extremely well-run club, right? Like, they're never in the discussions about the financial fair play and all this kind of stuff. He's hired a succession of coaches that should have worked, like Espirito Santo, Mourinho, Conte. Good coaches. And it must be really hard for him, having created this thing that should now equate to trophies and top 6 finishes, to see that it hasn't, and for someone to tell him, why not give someone else a go at like running the football club because they'll do it better? Very difficult. Well, one other thing, actually, what pops into my head about Tottenham, Ollie. I read an interesting article in The Guardian this week about how Ange Postecoglou needs to succeed because if you look at the top sides in the Premier League and the Premier League in general, pretty much always go for European coaches, right? Like always European or British coaches. Very rarely, if ever, will you get a coach from Asia. Like, can you imagine a coach from Japan or a country in Africa or New Zealand or Australia come to the Premier League and get like a big job? It doesn't really happen, right? And there may be many legitimate reasons behind that. I don't know. I haven't delved into the complexity. But the thesis of this article was that Postecoglou needs to succeed because if he doesn't, it'll be another thing that is used against coaches from Africa or Asia in the sense that, let's stick to Europe because we know what European coaches can do. We're safe with the European coach. They understand it all. Rather than someone being like, you know what, there's this fella in Japan who's doing incredible things with this club or that club, or there's this, there's this guy in Morocco or whatever, or New Zealand, we're going to take a punt on him. But
Lee Bowyer's having a great turn in charge of French Martinique or whatever was we were talking last week. Look what Bowyer's done with Zimbabwe over the last 6 years. If you could turn that side into a competing nation in the...
Why can't you get us into the Champions League? Yeah, obviously it doesn't equate exactly, but I did think it was kind of interesting. I mean, the accent's an interesting one because it's very easy to subtly mock the mate thing from Postecoglou, but it's kind of interesting territory as well because I don't know.
Do you think that potentially hinders him in big moments trying to?
I believe so, and that's not really fair. Whereas a slick Portuguese guy saying certain things seems to go down better.
You could just see someone like the more reprobates in that Tottenham dressing room just having like a little snigger as Ange is laying into them at half time. Like, crikey,
tell me there isn't a WhatsApp group of Tottenham players, and like after they've lost, just someone being like, mate, or something like, tell me there isn't that WhatsApp group. There obviously is. Disappearing messages set to 24 hours. Don't worry about it. Like 100% that exists.
That ray gun meme just going around every few days. Ange was hopping mad today.
Right. Sorry. Australian Open. Before we talk about the actual tennis, Ollie, I know something that caught your eye this week that I didn't see actually. So you said that was it in the mixed doubles or the doubles?
No, the women's doubles.
Talk to us about this because the commentator's nightmare.
The women's doubles featured 2 sets of identical twins wearing, very usefully, identical outfits. And all I could think was, do you remember when Romania in Euro 96 all dyed their hair bleach blonde? And all the commentators were like, well, thank God there's at least numbers that are visible on the back of these shirts because this is so tough. Because that was loads of multicoloured boots as well, which is always things you should know about football commentators and sports commentators in general. Multicoloured boots, wearing an Under Armour top, and hairstyles are like 3 of the biggest things for player identification. It's not about the number at all times. It's about those sorts of things that you can pick up on from a gantry or a wide shot.
I remember always loving commentating on CSKA Moscow as well because Wagner Love had like this purple hair, or like any player who comes on as a sub or starts and they've got a crazy hairstyle or crazy boots, or as you say, Ollie's more niche, but the undershirt as well does make a big difference. But yeah, it's a dream situation. So I mean, tennis is a little bit different because you've got that moment to set. You don't have to be as reactive as football.
But who's on serve at the start? You don't know, and I would.
Well, the umpire will. Yeah, okay. I'm trying to think if the umpire says no because they'll. Yeah, it's tricky. It's tricky.
You're starting on the back foot immediately as a broadcaster because you don't know who's serving first. If you knew who's serving first, you've got half a chance of being able to work it out, obviously, throughout the match. But if you don't get that information relayed to you, you're suddenly absolutely cream crackered. It's, they've done it. Great. Well done. It's just utterly useless. And maybe that's a reason for getting rid of the tradition of wearing all white at Wimbledon and at least allowing more multicoloured attire on a tennis court at Wimbledon.
Tennis needs all the help it can get.
It really does.
Yeah. Yannick Sinner won the men's won the men's the Australian Open back-to-back titles, his third slam. I think he's going to go on and win plenty more, even though there's a kind of odd sort of potential drugs ban looming over him, which creates a bit of a weird situation. But I think really, I mean, Novak Djokovic always the story. They're just the biggest name in the sport still. But nothing lasts forever, Ollie. One of my predictions this year was that Djokovic would win a 25th Grand Slam. If I could go back in time, I think I would say he won't. I just think it's the end of something incredible. And, hiring Murray was an interesting idea, and, getting angry. I mean, ironically, he got very angry at a pundit that called him a has-been, and it was over for him. But people get angry at stuff that's kind of true in some ways.
Hurts
like
if it's true. Yeah,
like he's the GOAT. Don't get me wrong, he's the GOAT. He's the best tennis player of all time. But it's still going to sting if someone points out the fact that, hey, like the years are slipping by now, and I don't know. It's tricky for Novak. I think last year when he won the Olympic gold, which was the one thing he'd never won against Carlos Alcaraz in the final, I think that was the absolute summit. And bar something incredible happening, I just think grandfather time is too powerful. And I think this year we'll see Novak kind of slowly bowing out of the sport at the very highest level. Do
you think? Because I get the feeling that obviously he's had to retire from the Australian Open this year due to injury and stuff. But I get the feeling that this might be one of those painful ones to watch as a sports fan, of just seeing a guy. There is literally that one last step that he wants to get over, and I think he's so keen to do it, to cement that legacy. It's like, I'm the last survivor of this elite group of tennis players that have been dominating men's tennis, and I am going to be the guy that finally sets all the records. And it could be ugly. Like, it might not be. It might be great. And it'd be awesome if he, say, turns up at Wimbledon, smashes it, does it on a grass court, the iconic home of British tennis. That'd be wonderful for the tournament. But
he's you think he's right. I mean, I've given a speech before about resisting against the dying of the light, or whatever the quote is. But I think he's earned the right to go out pretty messily. Like, I think he's earned the right to slip down the rankings and just try, just play the slams and hope for some kind of magical 2 weeks where everything, slots in for him. So I think he's earned the right to do that. I don't believe. I hate the thing of you have to retire at the absolute top. I don't think it's necessary at all. I think you love the sport. Your legacy is your legacy. And I think if you've won loads of stuff, I don't think people are going to remember the last 18 months of you scrapping around, going out here or there. So I think he's earned the right to do that if he wants to. Whether he wants to or not, I'm not sure. It's just unusual to see, such a supreme athlete eventually just pick up these kind of injuries, and he's clasping anything.
You can't win as Djokovic, because if you bow out at the top, everyone goes, "Oh, did he have one more in him? Did he have one last one in him?" Like, it's not an ideal way. You want to be able to be as mobile as possible, but what you really want as a top athlete is a career-ending injury that's out of your hands, so no one can ever ask the question, could he have done it? People would say he would have done it if it wasn't for that, but he went out at the peak, and obviously that's not an ideal thing.
I mean, Andy Murray, Ollie, went 5-6 years towards the end of his career where he was obviously done but didn't want to be done, so he just had no clarity. I mean, he could have taken a different fork in his life and his career years ago, realistically, but he just was so desperate to hang on. Be interesting to see
took like surgery after surgery after surgery, and that's the thing.
But one thing I would say is the slam makeup of the tennis calendar does mean that you can look at a calendar year and say, right, there's 4 slams. I'm just going to aim to be fit for each of those 4, especially someone like Novak Djokovic who doesn't care about money or rankings or anything like that.
That doesn't work, though, because we've seen that with golf with Tiger Woods, who's like had injuries, car crashes, all that kind of stuff. And last year, Tiger took this idea of, I'm going to only really play the majors. And that takes you out of the consistent competitiveness, which is terrible for then going into a major competition without being competition mental ready, let alone still not quite being physically ready and not being tried and tested, particularly in a sport like tennis, I think, where you obviously way more mobility perhaps than golf on an athletic level in that sense. So the moment you start going, I'll just make sure I'm fit for the slams, you lose that edge, that tweak, which Djokovic has the talent to be able to get him through in those moments, but maybe at his peak for sure, definitely had it. But I think at this point now, it's a dangerous game to play that, because then you also look like the guy that's only turning up for the big event, isn't quite doing it, and then scurrying off again, which is not an ideal look.
NFL, we touched on it. I think if I clip something up for YouTube on NFL this week, I'll kind of piece these two bits together, Mr. Wilson. Tell us what's happening. Tell us why Taylor Swift's smiling, and tell us why all roads lead to the Super Bowl and the 3-peat.
All right, well, firstly, Taylor Swift, and why Taylor Swift is smiling, because I'm smiling this morning, Dave, because I stayed up and watched the Philadelphia Eagles absolutely destroy the Washington Commanders in a divisional rivalry matchup in the NFC Championship game, and the Eagles picked up the victory very comfortably indeed, put over 50 points on Washington. The second half was an absolute blowout. Washington will say that they ballsed up because of turnovers, etc. But all of this started, and it's a question I want to ask you, Dave, of the worst moves by managers and general managers of any sporting team that have come back to bite them so quickly. Because the Philadelphia Eagles in the off-season, before this season got going, many moons ago, went out and picked up a guy called Saquon Barkley, who played for one of their biggest rivals, the New York Giants. And the Giants basically said to Saquon Barkley, who is a running back, which is for various reasons that probably don't have time to get into, running backs are very much undervalued. You pay your quarterbacks a lot of money, you pay your wide receivers a lot of money. Running backs considered, we can just throw a guy in as long as he's got the blocking lanes. Yeah, so undervalued. Saquon wanted more money from New York. He'd been at New York for the whole of his career so far. And unfortunately, the Giants had a behind-the-scenes documentary crew following their off-season. And the general manager kind of says, look, we'll let him test free agency where he can go and talk to other teams. He's out of contract now with us. And then, either someone will overpay for him or he'll come back to us and we'll be able to give him the money that we're willing to offer at this point. And the general manager of the New York Giants and the owner of the New York Giants have a conversation. And the owner's like, well, I'm hearing that the Philadelphia Eagles are interested in Saquon. And if Saquon Barkley went to the Philadelphia Eagles, I would have trouble sleeping at night because that's their biggest rivals. And that's exactly what happened. Barkley signed a deal with the Eagles, who are willing to pay him, and Saquon Barkley has more rushing yards than anybody else this season. He's arguably the MVP, most valuable player of the league, and he ran a storm over the Washington Commanders yesterday to put the Eagles in the championship game, in the Super Bowl. So, biggest foul-ups in sports history from a management perspective over handling players. This goes down as one of the worst of all time, particularly now as we've got all the inside the office video footage that is constantly being relayed of Giants owners and membership saying, we really don't want him to go to Philadelphia, don't let him go, and they let him go. I can't think of anything else that's bit a team in the backside so much.
I mean, the minute you invite, when you said, unfortunately, they had a documentary team recording on it, I mean, there's nothing unfortunate about that, is that? They signed a contract, they wanted the money, the exposure, they knew exactly what they were doing, and that's a great addition.
Also, during that documentary, the general manager's son and him are 13-year-old son are talking about who they should draft that year in the draft. And the GM's son said, you should draft Jaden Daniels at quarterback. He's a great QB, did really well in college. Jaden Daniels was the Washington Commanders quarterback in the NFC Championship game last night. So the Giants have footage now of them ballsing up on a running back and a 13-year-old boy telling his dad who he should have drafted in the draft before it took place. I mean, it's brutal. Brutal.
Where's your affiliation with the Eagles, Ollie?
I just playing video games when I was a youngster. No, playing video games as a youngster. I hadn't been to the States. It was 2001, and Philadelphia had just picked up this young quarterback called Donovan McNabb, and he was one of these guys in an era where it wasn't so prevalent that could run and throw, and it was just really exciting watching him play. And then the more I watched them and the more I saw kind of the attitude around Philadelphia, I really liked the kind of hard edges. We're nasty fans. Nobody likes us. We don't care. It very much fit into my attitude around stuff. It's a full siege mentality in Philadelphia, and it's just escalated to the point that I was. My fiance last night was like, "You are hyped up for this," because the first drive of the game, I'd gone from being back of the sofa to just come edge, and no sport does it like that at all. Does it? Nothing.
Stuff. Yeah.
And then I guess on the other side of this whole thing, we've got Patrick Mahomes and the officials helping the Chiefs to a Super Bowl, looking for 3 Super Bowl victories in a row, the three-peat, as we've touched on already. And obviously their tight end, Travis Kelce, is dating Taylor Swift, so she's going to be front and centre all week at the Super Bowl, and it's going to be all about the Chiefs and all about looking for a three-peat. And there are skeptics that would say that the NFL wants the Chiefs to win 3 in a row because it's something that Tom Brady and Bill Belichick never did in New England. And obviously there was the Spygate scandal and the Deflategate scandal around both of those two players and coach. So it's kind of seen as maybe a move that the NFL
Cleans
wants.
it up.
Yeah, it's like our greatest of all time isn't Tom Brady, who was like win at all costs, that psychopath kind of level. It's Patrick Mahomes, who everybody loves, and he sounds a bit like Kermit the Frog. And we've got Taylor Swift as part of this thing now as well, and it's all good. So there are some, because the Chiefs get, you know how everyone was like United get a penalty late on to salvage a victory at Old Trafford every week. The Chiefs have this with refereeing calls, but there is so much evidence during these playoff games to back up that they get calls that other teams and other players don't get. It's getting a little bit ugly right now. And there's been another leg added to the saga of the Buffalo Bills trying to get back to a Super Bowl after losing 4 in a row in the 80s and 90s. So, and there's kind of a nice story building of the Bills beat the Chiefs in regular... Excuse me.
Bless you, Mr. Wilson. You need some sleep, my friend.
The Bills beat the Chiefs in the regular season at like whenever they meet. But when you get into playoff football, the Chiefs have won 4 in a row now against Buffalo. And it's one of those ones that's kind of setting up a bit like the Boston Red Sox against the New York Yankees in the early 2000s, of like Boston would always get to the kind of semi-final stage of the MLB playoffs, face the Yankees and like bottle it in some way. And they'd always have a chance and they'd never quite get over the hump. And I think it's the next great sports documentary to do in 20 years' time is the rivalry of the Bills and Chiefs right now, but it requires Buffalo to win one to have the overarching storyline. Otherwise, it's just quite a sad, depressing finish to it.
The greatest sports documentary that never got made, by the way, was pitched by Ollie Wilson back in 2019, and that was as a small club in Ecuador called Independiente del Valle. And no one would have heard of this outside those that follow South American football, but it's this tiny club in Ecuador that went on to compete at the very highest level, you know, with the biggest clubs in South America. And it was just like this amazing, iconic story of this incredibly well-run tiny club. And Ollie called it ages ago. And if you'd have put proper production value behind it, Ollie, bear in mind, you know, they reached the Libertadores final in 2016 and then went on to win like the Sudamericana. You know, I think it would have been a great doc, and I actually think it would have done really well. But
what's the next great sports documentary that you'd like to see? But like
what
a proper removed 20, 30 years after, so you get the actual juiciness of it.
Oh, that's a great question. Can you leave that with me till Not Another Sports Pod 32? Because I'm going to need a little time to think about that. Have you got one on the tip of your tongue?
I think one of them, and this one's I just popped into my head, obviously the Bills-Chiefs thing I genuinely think would be a great one. But the other one would be a behind-the-scenes of the Barclays era of the Premier League, because that's when the Premier League went from like, it's Premier League football to like Barclays Premier League became the biggest league on the planet during that spell. And there must have been so much discussion, both on and off the pitch, with either players that have become iconic and managers that have become iconic, and teams have obviously cemented their status as the big clubs in that league over that period, along with the business dealings and like how the Premier League had to force their way through, how like, you know, Sky and the Premier League almost bankrupted each other by putting all that money in the early 90s kind of thing, but now saw that coming to fruition over that Barclays period. I think has the potential, if there's enough twists and tales and nitty gritty, to be a really good doc to look at.
Mine would be Alexander Isak, how one man became the first £300 million footballer. It's actually an interesting backstory, Ollie. I think he, African heritage and then like Swedish kind of upbringing and education, then combined with like the Premier League. And anyway, I'm not going to talk about Alexander Isak more. Let's go on to any other business. Got a request from a listener this week to talk about Tony Mowbray. Tony Mowbray? Yeah, that's how you put it. God, he's been out the lexicon for so long, Ollie. I've nearly forgotten his name. He was pretty Barclays, wasn't he? He was sort of a face that was around that. Anyway, so essentially the theme of this is that only days from receiving the all clear from cancer, the 61-year-old returned to the dugout for West Brom. For West Brom, and I guess the theme of this is like how football coaches just can't let go, and anyone in football really just can't let go. And this is different, but this week I was covering La Liga out in Spain, and you remember obviously Manuel Pellegrini won the Premier League with Manchester City, the Chilean, and I saw he was Betis' coach, and I was thinking like, how old are you now, man? Because he looked pretty old at Man City, and he's in his 70s, and it's just like coaches just can't let go, no matter what happens to their health and their face and their family. There was lots of stuff recently, which I'm glad we didn't actually talk about on Not the Sports Pod, because I think it's kind of gossipy. But the Pep Guardiola thing, where his marriage is kind of broken down, Ollie. I don't know whether you read anything about this, but allegedly, he's a workaholic, and obviously that's affected his kind of family life and stuff like this. Tony Mowbray's situation is different because he's kind of recovered from cancer, but it's a drug, man. Like, football's a drug for people, and like, to the extent where you can sacrifice your health for something, that's when it just becomes something completely out of your control.
But it's also an inspiration, right? The reason Tony Mowbray may get through all of it,
that helped him in his recovery, of course.
Yeah. So it's difficult to say, because there's that winner's mentality. There's the being in the team, being a part of the team, being that leader of a team in football management that can have so many positive and negative spins on it. I think you just take the fact that Tony Mowbray is fit enough, well enough to get back into football management and to manage at a pretty top level in English football. Let's face it, probably the most stressful division in English football, the Sky Bet Championship, without a doubt. So you only just wish him well and hope that he's not pushing it too much or anything. It's when you see the guy that has like a heart operation and he's back in the dugout 4 days later, kind of thing, that then becomes more of a problem.
Was the Bologna Mihailovic? The Bologna boss?
Since Mihailovic, who was going through...
going through
chemo, wasn't he, while he was on...
Yeah.
And he was so frail, and it didn't... Yeah.
We could list off 10 right now. Gerard Houllier came back after a heart operation to coach Liverpool and died at quite a young age. And there's such a long list. It's not a sport that, if you want longevity and good heart health, I would recommend you stay away from football management.
I was probably not going to dip my toe in it, Dave, to be honest, if that's a bit of personal advice on my career. Shall I just...
Well, Ollie, you say that, but Leighton Buzzard, where are they in the football pyramid? I can imagine Ollie, maybe in your 50s, mate, when you got a little bit more time, or your 60s, thinking, well, I've watched a lot of football. Probably know what I'm doing. Next thing you know, there's a behind-the-scenes YouTube doc with Wilson screaming at the 19-year-old winger because he just doesn't want it enough.
I'm pretty good on Football Manager, like that guy that came up through the ranks.
In 20 years' time, it'll be like podcasts can run a football club. So it'll be like we just record the pod, and then like the team have to take orders based on our podcast or something like that.
Yeah,
what was the hashtag United fella? Who, you can hate it, but he's kind of ahead of his time. It was quite clever.
That's Spencer guy or whatever.
Nice football club.
Nice guy, actually. I've met him a couple of times.
Met him,
yeah. There's a lot of people involved in that hashtag United that have actually ended up going to other places in football, either as managers, coaches, or players. It's always quite interesting when you're doing your match prep and you're like, hashtag United was your like step up. All right, okay, fair enough.
I think you could like vote on players being in the team or not. Anyway, we're running out of time, Mr. Wilson. Another good pod down. I wanted to say, I've heard people do this on podcasts. Can you please rate us, loyal listeners, on Spotify? Give us the stuff. Wilson's rolling his eyes on the YouTube. And I fucking hate the modern obsession with, like, rate your dentist, rate the restaurant, rate your hotel, give me a 5-star rating, can we have your review for this, that, and the other? I hate all that. In fact, fuck it, don't rate us. We're going to make it anyway. Don't rate us. Whatever you do not give us 5 stars.
Go and rate the hotel at MK Dons Stadium. Go and rate that hotel at MK Dons Stadium. Go and rate that and bury it into the ground. I hope they make no more money off that gross institution which is not affiliated with MK Dons Football Club, who are delightful. But go and rate that hotel and make sure it gets all of its stars removed as quickly as possible. Much like Tyson Fury has removed himself from the boxing world. We should touch on this very quickly. This was like huge news in that Tyson Fury has now decided to retire. For like the second time.
He's retired 6 times. That's why it's not huge news. I've got a flight to catch, my friend. So sum up Tyson Fury retiring in one sentence, and then we're out.
Tyson is going to come back for adds a payday to the Joshua fight that will inevitably happen when it's they're too old and done and dusted.
Far too late. It'll be 2029 or something, won't it?